Hey everybody, what's up, and welcome to what I hope is going to be the first installment in a long-running series where we take a look at roguelikes or rogue-lites. But before I get into that, I want to sort of talk about what makes a roguelike or a roguelite, what the difference between those two is, and why you should care. So first of all, a roguelike derives its name from an early dungeon crawling DOS game called Rogue. Now in this game you see a lot of elements of what we consider parts of roguelikes, rogue-lites, but the big distinction here is that rogue-likes are specifically dungeon crawlers. They're usually step turn-based, so it means that enemies don't move unless you're moving, laid out on a grid, featuring RPG progression mechanics, similar to something that would be like in a WRPG or like a Dungeons & Dragons game, procedural generation, and permadeath. So there's an algorithm making each level or floor of the dungeon, placing items in it, and placing enemies in it that will be different each time. Permadeath obviously just means you can't save runs, and in between runs there is no long-term progression. So that's a rogue-like. Now, for rogue-lites, essentially all it means is you take any sort of aspect of a rogue game and mesh it into another genre. But most commonly the things that we see in rogue-lites these days are, again, procedural generation. So you have an algorithm making the levels and placing and populating them. Permadeath, so no long-term progression, or you can't like save games in between runs. However, the big difference, I think, in a roguelike and a roguelite is almost every roguelite has some form of meta progression, which means you're either unlocking items that will go through subsequent runs with you. This is something you see in like Isaac or Gungeon, or unlocking extra like encounters or rooms you can run into. Things like Rogue Legacy let you unlock extra playable characters or boost your character's stats. That sort of meta progression is all things that I think specifically are part of the rogue-lite genre that are not part of the rogue-like genre. So now that we've got that out of the way, what I want to do is a little something I'm calling Rogue-lite Roundup. And I'm sure there'll be like a graphic here if I'm feeling like I know how to make a video. Basically what I've noticed is I like to play roguelites quite a bit, but I don't end up finishing a lot of them, and as a result I don't end up playing a lot of them. But it's such a popular genre now, and there are an awful lot piling up on my Steam library. So I thought it would be fun to look at 5 different games each time, spending about an hour, maybe more with each, do a quick review of what I like and what I don't like, and whether I think they are worth playing or not. I do, at least in the beginning, want to avoid really popular games like Isaac or Gungeon or Hades. I feel like those games have been investigated and talked to death, and I don't know that my voice really adds anything to them. And I do want to mostly look at games that I haven't played before, but since we are going through my Steam library, that won't always be the case. But I do want to try and give realistic, like first impression kind of style reactions. So, as a heads up, These are obviously all just my opinion. If I don't like your favorite roguelite and I insult it, please don't come after me. Also, if I use the words roguelite and roguelike interchangeably, don't come after me, because I don't care that much, honestly, and they're so similar that it's really easy to mistake the two. Alright, let's get into it. Colt Canyon is a top-down twin-stick shooter in the style of Enter the Gungeon or something like Nuclear Throne. Controlling your character, you traverse the canyon killing evil villagers and cowboys. Armed with everything from melee weapons to lassos to shields and spears, and of course with guns. While a lot of these types of games are focused into discrete individual room encounters spread around with different special rooms that you can find or NPC encounters, Colt Canyon decides to take the tack of a more sprawling adventure, where maps are incredibly large and broken up into much smaller chunks that progress along the course of a run. As you move through the game, you'll find a merchant that will trade you items for bullets, as well as captured prisoners who can be released to give you perks. Each character also going forward from the original default character has its own set of abilities, specializations, and loadouts that you can unlock as you progress in the game. Ammo conservation and use is also an important thing to manage in this game, since it's not only your currency, but there are no infinite ammo weapons, so you'll always be foraging around for ammo in nearby crates or jars, and making sure you keep an eye on what your two different choices of guns use, and if you need to swap that out for a different gun. Overall, I had a pretty good time with this game. I think it's a fun setting, and the art style is visually striking. It looks cool without getting in the way of the actual gameplay. There are a couple of things that I found frustrating, mostly that since the maps are so big, it's easy to get lost in them and kind of hard to navigate. I almost wish that you had a mini-map that you could unlock or equip or even buy from a store at some point. It would make traversal a lot easier. This is especially important because since the maps are so big, there's a lot of secrets or encounters hidden in them that might be important to progress further and make a successful run. Another thing I noticed that I think is really interesting about this game is it has an active reload system, something akin to Gears of War, where about halfway through your reload cycle, you have a chance to hit the reload button again, and it'll either fully reload your weapon or allow you to continue to shoot without having it fully reloaded. In my time playing this, I also noticed that unlocks come pretty fast, which is an appreciated function. Almost every run I was making, even though none of them were successful, I was always unlocking a new character or a new loadout for a character. In general, I find this game to be a little bit simplistic to be really engaging, but overall I think it's a pretty fun play, and if you're a fan of twin-stick shooters, especially roguelikes, I think you could do way worse than this. I recommend that if it looks interesting to you, go ahead and pick it up. Bit Dungeon is a top-down hack-and-slash, something akin to a Zelda game. Out of all the games I played this time, this one is probably the most simple, but paradoxically also the most confusing and hard to understand. And out of all the games I played, this has the least roguelite systems in it as well. As far as I can tell, the only things that are being procedurally generated here are enemy placements and possibly store inventories. As far as I know, all of the map locations, including where the dungeons are placed, are all laid out ahead of time. Very much in the style of Zelda 1, you control a little dude who progresses through the overworld looking for different dungeons that you go into, kill the boss, until finally you're able to open the portal to what I assume is the final boss area at the end of the game. There's usually one area per environment that has a bonfire and a shop. These function as your starting points as well as points where you can rest and recover your HP. I also noticed past the first one, there will be NPC encounters where you can fight them to get extra gear. This game also is interesting because it has a almost unique combat style for the genre. Instead of pressing an attack button to do an attack, this game uses the bump combat style, which is present in a lot of early Ys games as well as games like Rogue-lite. You essentially rub your character up against enemies, and he attacks in intervals of whatever his attack speed is. This is usually dependent on what weapon you're wielding. The only active thing that you can do is you can charge up a special attack that changes depending on your weapon, or if you're wielding a shield, you can send out a little shockwave that does a temporary paralysis effect on enemies nearby. From what I could tell while playing, enemies stay at a consistent level until you beat a dungeon boss, and then it updates the difficulty of enemies across the world. This happens each time you kill a dungeon boss. Level ups come pretty fast, and as far as I could tell, your level up stats are determined by what weapon you use. This game also uses stat scaling for its weapon damages, so weapons can either scale with strength, dexterity, intelligence, or spirit. Wielding a weapon that scales with dex and strength might give you 1 point of each of those, as well as a point of constitution, whereas a weapon that scales solely with strength just gives you 2 points of strength and 1 point of constitution when you level up. While this is a fun little game and certainly would make a really good mobile experience, I could definitely see playing it as a sit-down experience on a computer is pretty unsatisfying. I found the combat to be not very interesting and incredibly passive. Generally, it boils down to you should have enough attack to kill an enemy in one hit, or a fast enough weapon to kill an enemy before it can get a hit off, because there often isn't enough time for you to move your character out of the way to dodge an attack. Bosses boil down to dodging projectiles and a DPS race to kill them before your health runs out. I think this could be a really fun game if they added a little bit more active combat mechanics, and I know that there's a sequel out now, so I'm curious to see maybe that will have improved on some of the gameplay. Overall, though, I think unless you are specifically looking for this kind of game, or like I said, it might be a fun mobile experience, that this is probably one to pass by. Bad North is a combination of RTS and almost tower defense style gameplay in a roguelite format. Out of all the games that I played for this video, I think I definitely had the most fun with Bad North and could see myself going back to play more in the future. You start off commanding 2 armies of Vikings who are defending their home island against attackers. It's a pretty simple concept though. Waves of enemies will come at certain time intervals, and you have to position your units around the map in order to intercept them and stop them from throwing Molotov cocktails at your villages. Also, as your units take damage, you can garrison them in houses to recover their health over time. Successfully completing an island defense nets you a little bit of gold each time, which in turn can be spent on leveling up your character's class, improving an item, or improving their class ability. One of the things that really surprised me the most about this game is, though it's incredibly simple, there are only 3 classes of units that you can get, and how you choose to mix them up in encounters and utilize them really makes the difference in an encounter being successful or a failure. As you progress forward in the map, islands behind you will become unavailable, making you have to focus on forward momentum and making sure that you're not going to be hit by the rising tide. Each individual island encounter will show you what enemy types are going to be in that encounter, as well as giving you a layout of the island itself before you deploy your troops. Also, if you are going to gain any friendly armies at the end of the battle, or an item at the end of the battle, that will be displayed as well. Interestingly, in terms of meta progression, this game probably has the least out of any of the ones that I played, where the only meta progression comes in traits that you unlock as you play the game for new starting parties at the beginning of a run. If you find an army out in the wild that has a unique trait, oftentimes recruiting them into your army will unlock that trait for subsequent runs. Honestly, I think it would be really fun and interesting to see them add extra content to this game, but the way that it is even now, being so simplistic, it's still a lot of fun and surprisingly complex for how simple it is, like I said. I would easily recommend this game to anyone who likes tower defense or small RTS encounter games. I think it's really cool and a lot of fun. Black Future 88 is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. The first thing that's easiest to notice about Black Future 88 is it's absolutely dripping with visual design. Dark synthwave music pounds in the background as you traverse a living tower that's strewn with robot enemies and neon lights. As you complete certain actions in the tower itself will mutate and change what you're going to fight. I'm not exactly sure how this mechanic works, but as you progress through a run, you will see that it fills up a meter at the bottom of the screen, which will apply different effects to the tower, say extra enemies appearing, more difficult bosses, or hunters. Hunters are stronger enemy units that are similar to a player character themselves and will pop up continually over the course of going through a run. Killing them usually nets you more money, as well as a special gun. One interesting thing about this game is it uses time as a currency as well as money. In the story of the game, your character essentially has a bomb placed in their heart, and if more than 20 minutes elapse, then your character's heart blows up. Getting access to certain mutations, perks, or item shops will cost you time, which potentially shortens your run, but there are also ways to gain time back. In most of the shop rooms, there is a obelisk that allows you to plant time, essentially, in order to grow it, and the next time you come to another deadlock obelisk, it will give you more time back. There are also certain perks and abilities that you can take that give you time back for killing enemies. At the end of each run, successful or otherwise, you will fill up a progress bar based on what you were able to complete in the specific run itself. At certain breakpoints, you will unlock more guns that appear, more perks, more mutations, more items that'll show up in the item shop, as well as unlocking more characters to play through runs as. Here again, each character has their own unique loadout and special abilities that suit them for specific gameplay types. I personally found it the most fun to play as the character which starts with a sword, and I was surprised for being a gun-focused game that actually melee gameplay is pretty well supported in this game. Overall, I think this is a pretty cool attempt at a game, but I feel like it's not as good as other games that have done the same sort of style of thing better. One of the things that I find kind of frustrating about this game is that I feel like there are a lot of systems going on in the background that the game just doesn't really explain to you. It took me a while to realize that you can look at the pause menu to see what the tower mutations are as they come up, as well as sometimes perks just tell you what they do, and sometimes they have really cryptic descriptions that aren't useful. There are other mechanics like taking too many stims in-game gives you a sickness health bar, but I don't really know what that means or what it did to my character. Also, there's a curse mechanic in this game that isn't really well explained either. I generally figured that you take more damage when you're cursed, but the game never actually told you that's what's going on. If you like the style and the gameplay of this one, then it might be worth picking up, although again, I would say that there are other games that do this sort of thing better, so it might be best to just hold on to your money. Abyss Odyssey is a side-scrolling dungeon crawler with some interesting combat mechanics. The game itself is a pretty standard side-scrolling platform action game, something that feels akin to a Metroidvania without having the actual progression gates and progression of a Metroidvania. There are 3 different characters available to you in total, 1 that you will start with and 2 more that you will unlock as you play through the game. Each character has their own set of weapons that they can use, as well as special abilities that you'll be able to unlock as you level up and gain skill points. The meta progression in this game articulates in the form of levels being saved across characters, so you always enter the dungeon in a more leveled up form, as well as holding on to any gold that you collected over the course of the previous run. At the beginning of each run, you are given a lane to go down, 1, 2, or 3, 1 being the easiest but the longest, 2 being balanced and a little bit shorter than 1, and 3 being the shortest one but the most difficult. At any point during your run, as you progress down the abyss, you can find a map at the end of each level section, which are color-coded to tell you how difficult the next section you're moving into is, as well as give you locations of bosses and special room encounters. On top of this, as you progress down, you can also move sideways via doors that can be unlocked with special silver keys that you will pick up as you progress through the game. I think the big unique feature here, though, is the combat itself. Instead of being a standard press an attack button to do an attack style combat, it takes something from a more brawler style gameplay. So you're doing A to do a standard attack and then a directional move to do a move in that direction. Something like a Smash Brothers kind of approach. This applies to special abilities as well, which you unlock as you level up, which can be assigned to up, down, right, and the special button. This game is slightly more generous per run, as it has a feature where if your character dies, a NPC character, essentially what would be just a low-rank enemy character, comes along, and if you're able to get them to a checkpoint, you can revive your character with weapons, items, and keys that you've dropped. This allows you to string along a long string of deaths as long as you are always able to make it to the next checkpoint area. Overall, I think this is a pretty cool game and definitely very interesting. The combat didn't really click for me, unfortunately. I've never been that good at brawlers or Smash Brothers type games, so I just don't really have a feel for it. I would much have something more fluid and easy to access, whereas the combat in this game, since the moves are all very almost like fighting game in the way that they come out, your attacks and movement feels very stiff, I guess. Definitely not the game for me, but I can see how it would be appealing to people, and it's interesting to see a game try and adapt that kind of combat style into a game that's specifically not Smash Brothers. Thanks again to everyone for joining me. Hopefully this was an interesting little foray into some roguelites. I had a lot of fun with this, and hopefully we will be doing this and revisiting it again. In the meantime, of course, if you liked the video, please do all the YouTube engagement stuff, click the thing and ring the thing and, you know, comment the thing. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions of games that you'd like me to cover. I'm always open to that. And until next time, I hope you have a lovely life and you're all super great.